The night is cold at the end of the Ice Age. Somewhere along a coastline that no longer exists, waves lap against wooden pilings. The sound is rhythmic, eternal. Above, stars wheel across a sky untouched by city lights. In the distance, perhaps a mile inland, small flames flicker, oil lamps burning in windows, torches along carefully planned streets. This is a world we've forgotten, or perhaps a world we never knew existed. 12,800 years ago, the Earth was transforming. Glaciers that had stood for millennia were weeping into the oceans. Coastlines were drowning. And if the stories whispered around fires are true, entire civilizations were vanishing beneath the waves. Tonight, we're going to explore a question that archaeologists argue about in hushed voices. What if an advanced civilization, not aliens, not Atlantis, but real human beings with real ingenuity, was wiped from history by the catastrophe we call the Younger Dryas? Before embarking on this journey, if you enjoy exploring new perspectives on history, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. There's something beautiful about knowing we're all wandering together, scattered across time zones, connected by curiosity. This story works best with headphones, dim lights, and an open mind. So settle in, let the world outside fade, and let's visit a civilization that may have drowned before history could remember its name. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Stage, Younger Dryas World. To understand what might have been lost, we first need to understand when. Picture the Earth 13,000 years ago. For nearly 100,000 years, ice sheets had covered much of the northern hemisphere. Glaciers 2 miles thick sat atop what would become Chicago, London, Stockholm. The weight of all that ice actually pressed the continents down, deforming the planet's crust. But around 14,700 years ago, something shifted. The ice began its long retreat. Temperatures climbed. Forests crept north. The great thaw had begun. And then, suddenly, it stopped. 12,800 years ago, the warming reversed. In what may have been mere decades, perhaps even years, temperatures plummeted. Scientists call this the Younger Dryas, named after an Arctic wildflower that suddenly reappeared in European pollen records. But that gentle name disguises a climate catastrophe. Imagine summer failing to arrive. Not for 1 year, but for more than 1,000 years. The cold snap lasted until 11,600 years ago. 12 centuries of climatic chaos. Glaciers that had been retreating suddenly surged forward again. Weather patterns shattered. Species that had survived the Ice Age itself went extinct. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, creatures that had endured 100 millennia of ice, disappeared within generations. What caused it? The evidence points to a perfect storm of disasters. Massive ice dams that had held back glacial lakes suddenly failed. Lake Agassiz, which covered an area larger than all the Great Lakes combined, burst through its ice walls. Billions of gallons of fresh water, cold, light, and devastating, poured into the North Atlantic. This freshwater lens disrupted the ocean currents that regulate global climate. The Gulf Stream, that great conveyor belt of heat that keeps Europe warm, stuttered and weakened. Some researchers point to additional triggers. Evidence of cosmic impact microscopic diamonds, iridium, charcoal layers suggest that fragments of a disintegrating comet may have struck the ice sheets themselves. The heat would have been unimaginable. Ice vaporizing. Wildfires igniting across continents. Shockwaves rippling through the atmosphere. Whether it was melting ice, cosmic impact, or both working together, the result was the same. The climate lurched. The world convulsed. And somewhere in that chaos, coastlines transformed overnight. But here's what matters for our story. For all its terror, the Younger Dryas didn't make Earth uninhabitable. It made it unpredictable, unstable. And humans, as we've proven again and again, can adapt to almost anything. What we struggle with is sudden, catastrophic change. The kind of change that arrives in a single night. The kind that erases everything. Now let's talk about what the world actually looked like before the floods came. Close your eyes And imagine standing on a California beach. Feel the sand under your feet. Hear the waves. Now, walk backward. Keep walking. 100 feet, 200, 300, 400 feet from the water's edge. You're still on dry land. This is hard to visualize because we're so accustomed to our current coastlines. But during the Ice Age and the early Younger Dryas, sea levels were 300 to 400 feet lower than today. That's not just a different beach. That's a different world. Where the surf breaks now, the land extended outward for miles. The continental shelves, those underwater plains that slope gently away from every continent, were exposed. Dry, habitable, and stunningly productive. Think about the most fertile places on Earth today. River deltas, estuaries where fresh water meets salt, coastal wetlands. Now imagine those environments stretched along thousands of miles of coastline, unbroken, pristine, and teeming with life. The exposed continental shelves weren't barren plains. They were cut through with rivers that are now submarine canyons. The Amazon, the Mississippi, the Ganges, the Mekong, all these rivers extended miles beyond their current mouths, creating vast deltaic plains. Where those rivers met the ancient ocean, life exploded. Shellfish beds that went on for miles. Fish migrations that darkened the water. Waterfowl in numbers we can barely imagine. Seals, sea lions, whales feeding close to shore. And inland from these coastal zones, grasslands and forests filled with game. If you were a human 13,000 years ago, you wouldn't choose to live in the frozen interior, struggling to hunt mammoth across tundra. You'd live here, along these edges where the land met the sea, where food was abundant, where the climate was moderated by the ocean, where you could travel easily by boat, following coastlines, exploring estuaries, trading with neighboring groups. And that's exactly what people did. We know this because we're finding their traces. Not easily. Not in great numbers yet. But they're there. Off the coast of British Columbia, underwater archaeologists have discovered stone tools and fire pits 300 feet down, dating to the end of the Ice Age. Off Florida, divers exploring sinkholes have found human remains and artifacts in caves that were once dry. In the Persian Gulf, the entire southern portion was a fertile river valley until 8,000 years ago. The Gulf of Cambay off India shows sonar evidence of geometric structures beneath the waves. These weren't just camping spots. The evidence suggests sustained occupation, communities that returned generation after generation, places that were, in the truest sense, home. But here's the haunting part. We've explored less than 5% of the ocean floor with any detail. The technology to search systematically at these depths is expensive and rare. Most of what we've found has been accidental, stumbled upon by oil companies doing surveys, or sport divers exploring shipwrecks. The places where we'd most expect to find evidence of complex societies, major river mouths, protected harbours, confluences of trade routes, are buried under hundreds of feet of water and thousands of years of sediment. Imagine trying to understand modern civilization by examining 3 random street corners. That's where we are. So when we talk about a lost coastal civilization, we're not spinning fantasies. We're acknowledging a gap in the evidence. A gap the size of every coastline on Earth. These drowned lands weren't marginal environments. They were the California coast, the Mediterranean shore, the tropical deltas, but stretching unbroken for thousands upon thousands of miles. The most desirable real estate on the planet. And it was all erased when the ice melted. The sea level didn't rise gradually. It rose in fits and starts, with occasional surges that could lift the ocean dozens of feet in a matter of years or even months. When ice dams failed, when glaciers calved, when climate systems tipped, the water came fast. Fast enough that people would have noticed. Fast enough that they would have tried to adapt, build higher, move inland, but also fast enough that much of what they built would have been swallowed before they could save it. Picture a port city at the mouth of a river. Wooden docks, stone foundations, warehouses filled with trade goods, boats pulled up on beaches. People living their lives, arguing about politics, falling in love, teaching their children the names of stars. Now, picture the sea rising. First slowly, an inch a year, then a foot, then 3 feet. The docks are underwater. The lowest streets flood at high tide. People adapt, rebuilding higher up the slope. But then the ice dam breaks 1,000 miles away. The wave comes, not a tsunami. Those are quick. This is a surge that just keeps rising. 10 feet, 20 feet, 40 feet, and it doesn't recede. The city drowns. The people flee. And within a generation, there's nothing left but stories. Stories about a time when the world was different, when the coast was farther out, when great cities stood where now there is only water. Stories that become myths. Myths that we, today, dismiss as fantasy. But what if they weren't? What if the world before the Younger Dryas floods was more sophisticated than we've imagined? What if people weren't just surviving along these coasts? What if they were thriving, building, trading across vast distances, developing the kind of knowledge that comes from centuries of careful observation? We're about to explore what that civilization might have looked like. Not ancient astronauts, not laser beams or flying saucers, just human beings. Ingenious, adaptive, and skilled. People who read the tides like we read clocks, who built with wood and stone, who sailed by the stars, who created something remarkable, and then watched it all disappear beneath the waves. Chapter 2. The People. Civilization Portrait. Let's walk into this lost world. Not as archaeologists sifting through fragments, but as travelers arriving at a living city. The sun is rising over the Eastern Ocean. You're standing on a bluff overlooking a river delta that no longer exists. Below you, where the river spreads into dozens of channels, before meeting the sea, you see something that shouldn't exist, according to our history books. A city. Not Rome. Not Athens. Nothing with marble columns or paved roads. But, undeniably, a city. Planned. Organized. Built to last. The structures are mostly wood, massive posts sunk deep into the ground, supporting platforms, and buildings raised above the floodplain. The wood is weathered grey, carved with geometric patterns that might be decorative or might serve some purpose you don't immediately understand. Between the wooden buildings, you see walls of packed earth reinforced with stones, forming courtyards and protective barriers. The most striking feature is the water management. These people have turned the delta into a machine. Channels have been dug or perhaps expanded from natural waterways, creating a network that brings fresh water to every district while draining away excess during floods. Stone-lined canals carry drinking water from upstream. Other channels flush waste toward the sea. At the margins of the settlement, you can see earthen embankments holding back the river during high water. This isn't primitive. This is engineering. Walk closer. The morning is coming alive with sound. Along the main canal, wooden docks extend into the water. Boats are tied there, dugout canoes, yes, but also more sophisticated craft. Some have been hollowed from enormous logs and can carry a dozen people. Others appear to be built from planks, lashed or pegged together with high prows to handle ocean swells. People are loading these boats now. Baskets of dried fish, clay pots sealed with tree resin, probably containing oil or fermented foods, bundles of furs, worked stone tools wrapped in leather. This is trade. Regular, organized, routine. On shore, you see the infrastructure that makes this commerce possible. Warehouses built on stilts, their floors 8 or 10 feet above the current water level. Clearly, these builders know floods. They've planned for them. The storage buildings have walls of woven reed plastered with mud, but the foundations are stone, carefully fitted to create level platforms. Near the warehouses, smoke rises from low structures with stone bases. Kilns. The smell tells you they're firing clay. Pottery production on an industrial scale. Not the rough, hand-built pots you'd expect from primitive people, but vessels made with skill, thin, walled, symmetrical, decorated with incised patterns. Further inland, you see residential areas. Families are emerging from houses. Again, these are raised platforms with wooden walls and thatched roofs. But notice the details. The houses are clustered in neighborhoods with shared courtyards. In each courtyard, a central hearth, a grinding stone for grain. Storage vessels sunk into the ground to keep foods cool. This is community. social organization beyond the family unit. And then you see something that makes you pause. At the highest point of the settlement, there's a structure different from the others. It's massive, perhaps 100 feet across. Circular. The outer wall is stone, carefully stacked without mortar, but fitted with precision. The roof appears to be supported by enormous wooden posts, their tops carved into shapes that might represent animals or spirits or concepts you can't quite interpret. This isn't a house. It's something else. A gathering place. A temple. A observatory. Perhaps all three. Around this central structure, the ground has been leveled and paved with flat stones. Carved into the pavement are lines, geometric patterns, circular arrangements, alignments that point toward specific positions on the horizon. These people are tracking something. The sun's movement through the seasons, the moon's cycles, the rising points of particular stars. They're measuring time, predicting seasons, planning. An elder stands near the stone circle, watching the sunrise. In his hands, a stick carved with notches. He's counting something. Days, perhaps, or lunar months. Nearby, younger people are learning, watching, memorizing. This is how knowledge passes down. Not through writing, there's no evidence of that here, but through careful teaching, through mnemonics and stories and repeated observation, through ritual that embeds astronomical knowledge so deeply that it becomes culture itself. Look at the water management again. To build those canals, you need to understand hydrology. To predict flooding, you need to track seasons with precision. To maintain these systems across generations, you need social organization and knowledge transfer. These aren't random hunter-gatherers who happen to camp in the same spot. These are people with institutional knowledge, with specialists, with engineers who understand leverage and drainage and the behavior of water, with astronomers who can predict solstices, with potters who've spent years perfecting their craft, with boat builders who understand buoyancy and hull design. They might not have writing, they might not have metal, but they have something equally important. They have time. Generations of accumulated observation, centuries of refinement, and they have something else, something we're only beginning to appreciate about ancient peoples. They have deep, sophisticated relationships with their environment. They know which plants heal and which poison. They can read weather in the behavior of birds and the smell of the wind. They understand the seasons of fish runs and the migrations of game. They know how to work stone with precision that makes modern toolmakers weep with frustration. Advanced doesn't mean lasers and computers. Advanced means perfectly adapted, sustainable, resilient, or at least as resilient as any civilization can be when the world itself begins to change. The boats that left at dawn are returning now, but these aren't the same boats that departed. A vessel is approaching from the south, riding low in the water with cargo. As it comes closer, you can see it's different from the local boats. The design is similar, but the wood is darker, and the prow is carved with different symbols. The people aboard have different tattoos, different ornaments, different language. Traders from another coastal settlement. They're pulling up to the dock now, and something fascinating happens. There's no hesitation, no confusion. This is routine. A local official, you can tell by the carved staff he carries, comes forward. There's a ritual greeting, hands touching foreheads, words you don't understand, but that clearly follow a formula. Then the negotiation begins. The southern traders unload their cargo. Obsidian volcanic glass, razor sharp, the color of midnight. This didn't come from anywhere near here. The nearest obsidian source is hundreds of miles away, perhaps thousands. Yet here it is, already partially worked into blades and scrapers and arrowheads. In exchange, the locals offer their dried fish, their pottery, and something else. Shells. Not just any shells, specific types, carefully selected, some with holes drilled through them for stringing. These shells don't come from this coast. They come from tropical waters, far to the south. Which means the locals got them from someone else, who got them from someone else, in a chain that might stretch the entire length of the continent. This is long-distance trade, but it's not random. It's organized. Watch carefully. The traders are pulling out something else. A piece of bone, carved and polished. On its surface, scratches, geometric patterns. Some of them look like coastlines, some like star patterns, some like abstract symbols that might represent different trading partners or different goods. This is a map, a record, a way of remembering routes and relationships without writing. The local official has a similar carved bone. He and the southern trader compare them, pointing, discussing, confirming. They're checking routes, perhaps, or verifying identities, or ensuring fair trade based on previous exchanges. This isn't barter. This is sophisticated commerce with memory, with reputation, with long-term relationships. As the trade concludes, you notice something else. Some of the young people from the settlement are boarding the southern boat. They're carrying their own supplies. Their families are seeing them off with a mixture of pride and sadness. They're going to travel, to learn, to see other settlements, and bring knowledge back home. This is how ideas spread, not through books or internet, but through people. A young person travels south, learns a new pottery technique, comes home and teaches it. Someone travels north, sees a different way of building fish traps, adapts it to local conditions. A trader brings a story about the movements of herring 300 miles away, and the local fishermen adjust their strategies. Over time, over generations, knowledge accumulates, techniques spread, innovations ripple across the coast. The boats travel at night sometimes, you learn. The navigators use the stars. They've memorized the positions of key constellations throughout the year. They know which star rises where, which direction to steer to find familiar landmarks. They can read ocean swells, understanding which directions the waves come from, which indicate deep water, and which warn of shallows. This navigation knowledge is precious. It's taught carefully, tested rigorously. Getting it wrong means death. But getting it right means the entire coastline becomes connected. A settlement in what will one day be Oregon can exchange goods and ideas with one in what will become Ecuador. Not directly, not in a single journey, but through a chain of trading relationships that links the entire Pacific Rim. The same is happening on the Atlantic side. In the Mediterranean, in the Indian Ocean, along every temperate coastline where the ice has retreated and the living is good. This is a world connected by water, by boats, by people brave enough to explore and traders smart enough to profit. And here's what that means. When someone in one settlement figures out a better way to make rope, that knowledge spreads. When someone discovers that certain sea plants can be eaten or used as medicine, the information travels. When someone in a northern settlement perfects cold storage techniques, the idea migrates south. Innovation compounds. Each generation builds on the last. The carved bones the traders carry contain more than maps. They contain astronomical observations, tide tables, seasonal markers, locations of reefs and harbors, and dangerous currents. This is cultural technology, information storage without writing. And it works beautifully, as long as the culture remains unbroken, as long as the teachers survive to pass knowledge to students, as long as the settlements endure, as long as the coast remains where it has always been. It's midday now. The sun is high and warm. The settlement has found its rhythm. In the central market area, an open space near the main dock, people have laid out goods on woven mats. Fish, of course. Some dried, some smoked, some fresh from this morning's catch. But also other foods. Shellfish steamed open and preserved in their own juices. Wild grains collected from the grasslands inland and stored in waterproof baskets. Nuts. Tubers. Seaweed dried into crisp sheets. The abundance is staggering. These people aren't struggling to survive. They're choosing between options. A woman is trading fish for a clay pot. The potter examines the fish carefully, not just checking quality but evaluating. This is her art. Her pots are valuable because they're good. Well, fired. Symmetrical. Beautiful. She can afford to be selective about what she accepts in trade. Nearby, a toolmaker is showing a customer a new obsidian blade. The edge is so fine it's almost transparent. The customer tests it against a piece of wood, shaving off a curl so thin you can see light through it. Satisfied, he offers a bundle of fur in exchange. The toolmaker considers, touches the fur, nods, Trade complete. No money, no coins, but also no chaos. This is a economy of reputation and relationship. Everyone knows everyone. Cheating would be noticed. Excellence is rewarded. Children are playing near the water, supervised by elders too old for heavy work, but still vital to the community. The kids are practicing with toy boats, learning the basics of balance and steering. One boy has fashioned a small net and is trying to catch minnows. An elder watches, occasionally offering advice. This is education, not formal, not in a classroom, but systematic and effective. A group of women are working together near one of the raised houses, scraping and treating animal hides. They're singing while they work, a rhythmic chant that helps coordinate their movements. Every few verses, they all pull together, stretching the hide on a wooden frame. The song is doing multiple things at once, making the work easier, teaching the process to younger workers, and probably encoding other information. The names of ancestors, the proper times for hunting, the signs of changing seasons. In a shaded area, a man is carving. Not tools, art. A small figure, abstract but clearly human. When he finishes, it will join dozens of others on a shelf inside the large circular structure. Offerings, perhaps, or representations of ancestors, or simply the human need to create beauty, to leave a mark, to say I was here and I made this. The afternoon stretches on. People work, but without franticness. There's time for conversation, for sitting in the shade, for watching children play, for checking the sky and discussing tomorrow's weather. This is what abundance looks like. Not wealth in our sense, but security. Enough food, adequate shelter, time to think and create and teach. As evening approaches, something shifts. People begin gathering near the large circular structure. Families arrive carrying food. This isn't a special occasion. You can tell by how routine it is. This is simply how community happens here. Regular gatherings, shared meals, collective ritual. Fires are lit in arranged patterns around the stone circle. As darkness falls, someone begins to drum, a deep, resonant rhythm. Others join with smaller drums, with rattles made from gourds and shells, with flutes carved from bone. And then the stories begin. An elder stands. His voice carries across the gathering without shouting. He knows exactly how to project, how to pace. He's telling a story about the time before, about ancestors who lived when the ice still covered the northern lands, about a journey across the frozen wastes, about survival against impossible odds. The children are mesmerized. The adults know this story, but they listen anyway. These stories are infrastructure. They contain practical information about dealing with cold, with scarcity, with danger. But they also contain identity, who we are, where we came from, what we value. Later, someone else speaks. She's describing the movements of the stars, pointing out constellations, explaining which ones appear at which seasons. The knowledge is embedded in stories. The stars are hunters and prey, lovers and enemies. You remember the story, you remember the stars. A younger person stands to demonstrate a new fishing technique they learned from southern traders. Others watch carefully, ask questions, discuss modifications for local conditions. This is how civilization works without writing. This is how knowledge accumulates and spreads, through ritual, through repetition, through community gathering around fires and remembering together. The drums continue. Some people are dancing now, moving in patterns that might be purely social or might encode other information. The line between art, ritual, education, and entertainment doesn't really exist here. It's all woven together. As the night deepens, you notice the elders near the stone circle are observing the sky intently. They're checking positions, making marks on carved sticks, discussing in low voices. They're tracking time, ensuring the calendar stays accurate. Because knowing when to fish, when to plant, when to trade, when to move, that knowledge keeps everyone alive. You watch these people and you realize something. They're not primitive, they're optimized. Every practice serves multiple purposes. Every gathering strengthens social bonds while transmitting information. Every ritual is both spiritual and practical. Every story contains survival knowledge. This is human culture at its most elegant, sustainable, interconnected, resilient, or so it seems, until the sky begins to change. Chapter 3. The Warning. Sky Changes. The first signs are subtle, so subtle that only the oldest observers notice. It begins with the stars. For generations, for as long as anyone can remember, the elders have tracked the heavens with meticulous care. They know which stars rise where and when. They know the paths the sun and moon trace across the sky through the seasons. They know these things with a precision that would impress modern astronomers because their lives depend on it. But now, something feels wrong. An elder stands at the stone circle in the hour before dawn, watching. The star that should be rising just above that distant hill, the one that marks the beginning of the fishing season, is not quite where it should be. It's close enough that he questions his own memory. But he's been watching this star for 50 years. He knows. He mentions it to the other star. Watchers. They've noticed inconsistencies too. Small things. Angles that seem slightly off. Timings that don't quite align with the carved sticks they use to track days. Perhaps we've miscounted, one suggests. Perhaps the wear on the sticks has changed their markings. But they all feel the unease. The sky is supposed to be reliable, the one constant in a changing world. If the sky is shifting, what does that mean? Then the winds change. For years, the coastal people have known the wind patterns as intimately as they know the faces of their children. The morning breeze from the land, the afternoon wind from the sea, the seasonal shifts that bring rain or drought. These patterns are predictable. They're encoded in songs, in stories, in the very rhythm of daily life. But now the winds are confused. They blow from strange directions. They gust when they should be calm. They fall still when they should be steady. The fishermen notice first, because their lives depend on reading the wind. They return from the ocean with troubled faces, speaking of swells that come from unexpected quarters, of birds behaving strangely, of the water itself tasting different. The old woman who tends the weatherstones, smooth rocks arranged in patterns that help predict storms, studies them with growing concern. The signs contradict each other. Rain markers appear with drought markers. Storm warnings come on clear days. The system that has worked for generations is giving her nonsense. She's not wrong to worry. The temperatures are shifting too. Winters that should be mild turn suddenly harsh. Spring arrives late, or too early, or seems to skip entirely. Summers feel different, sometimes too hot, sometimes oddly cool. The growing seasons are becoming unreliable. The people who gather wild grains return from the inland grasslands with smaller harvests. The plants are stressed. Some species that always grew in abundance are thin and sparse. Others that should be rare are spreading aggressively. The ecosystem is wobbling. Fish migrations are off schedule. Species that usually arrive with the warming seas come early, or late, or not at all. The shellfish beds that have been harvested sustainably for generations are changing. Some areas become depleted unexpectedly. Other areas, previously barren, suddenly teem with life. The people adapt, because that's what people do. They adjust their fishing schedules. They range farther inland to hunt. They trade more aggressively with settlements in other climate zones to buffer against local failures. But there's a tension growing, a sense that the world is slipping away from the familiar patterns. The elders gather more frequently now at the stone circle. They compare observations. They debate interpretations. They try to find patterns in the chaos. Some of the observations are troubling in ways that go beyond practical concerns. The sea level is changing. It's not obvious at first. The tides rise and fall, as they always have. But there are markers, carved poles driven into the riverbed generations ago, stones placed at the high tide line, notches cut into dock posts to track the water level over years. And those markers are telling a story. The water is rising, not quickly. An inch some years, a few inches others. Some years it seems stable, but the overall trend is clear to those who keep the records. The ocean is claiming land that has been dry since the oldest grandparents were children. The people who live in the lowest lying areas notice it first. Houses that never flooded during spring tides are now getting wet. Canals that used to drain efficiently are sluggish, backing up with seawater. Storage areas that were safe are developing problems. With salt infiltration, adaptation begins. Homes are rebuilt on higher platforms. Embankments are raised. New canals are dug to redirect water. The community works together, pooling labor, helping those most affected. But there's an undercurrent of fear now, because some of the elders remember the old stories, the ones passed down from the time before. Stories about when the ice covered the world. Stories about great floods. Stories about the sea swallowing entire coastlines. Every culture has these stories. They're shared between settlements, traded along with obsidian and pottery. The details vary, but the core is always the same. There was a time when the waters rose and the world changed. Those stories were always treated as ancient history, warnings from the distant past, things that happened to other people in other times. But now, watching the markers on the dock posts creep higher year by year, the stories feel different. They feel like prophecy. The great circular structure is full tonight, not just with the elders and the knowledge keepers, but with representatives from every family, every craft, every district of the settlement. This is rare. Full councils are called only for the most important decisions. War, major construction projects, responses to catastrophe. Tonight, they're here to discuss the future. The head elder stands in the center of the circle. She's old enough to remember when the settlement was half its current size, when her own grandmother was the one standing in this spot making decisions. She carries the weight of that history. Her voice is steady, but you can hear the concern beneath it. The waters are rising, she says. This is no longer a question. The markers do not lie. In my grandmother's time, the sea was 200 paces farther out. In my mother's time, it was 100 paces distant. Now, it reaches the old fish-drying racks. Murmurs ripple through the gathering. Everyone knows this, but hearing it stated so plainly is still shocking. We must decide, she continues. Do we stay and build higher? Or do we move inland? The chief engineer stands. He's a younger man, brilliant with water systems and construction. He's spent his entire adult life maintaining and improving the settlement's infrastructure. We can build higher, he says with confidence. We've done it before. Raise the platforms another 5 feet. Extend the embankments. Build new canals to handle the increased water flow. The stone is available. We have the labor. We have the knowledge. His apprentices nod in agreement. This is what engineers do. They solve problems. They build. But an older voice interrupts. One of the astronomers, a woman who has spent decades watching the sky. 5 feet will not be enough, she says quietly. The patterns we're seeing, the climate chaos, the warming, the ice melting in the far north, they suggest this is not a temporary change. The water will continue to rise. Perhaps for generations, perhaps forever. Silence falls over the gathering. How high must we build? Someone asks. 10 feet. 20. How can we know? We cannot know, the astronomer admits. We have no precedent for this. The stories speak of great floods, yes, but they don't tell us how high the water rose or how long it lasted. A hunter speaks up, a man who ranges far inland in search of game. I've seen the highlands, he says. Good land there. Forests. Rivers. Game. Different from here, but livable. We could move. Start again, and abandon everything we've built. The engineer's voice is sharp. These canals took generations to dig. The stone foundations, the docks, the warehouses, we'd leave all of that. We'd leave buildings, the hunter replies. But we'd take what matters. Our people. Our knowledge. Our relationships with other settlements. Those don't depend on this place. Now others join in. The voices overlap. Debate rising. The inland tribes won't welcome us. That's their territory. We can negotiate. We can trade. We're not invaders. Our whole economy is based on fishing and ocean trade. What do we do inland? We adapt. We learn, like our ancestors did. Our ancestors built this place specifically because it was perfect. Why would we abandon perfection? Because perfection is drowning. The arguments continue, passionate but not angry. These people know how to disagree without destroying community. But you can feel the tension, the fear beneath the debate. Finally, the head elder raises her hand for silence. "We will not decide tonight," she says. "This choice is too important to rush. But I propose this. We prepare for both possibilities. Those who wish to build higher begin planning, calculate materials needed, design the new structures. Those who wish to scout inland start ranging, find good sites, make contact with inland peoples." She pauses, looking around the circle at faces she's known for decades. "And we send messages to the other coastal settlements. Share what we're seeing. Learn what they're experiencing. We are not alone in this. The water threatens all of us. Perhaps together we can find wisdom that eludes us individually." Heads nod. It's a compromise that satisfies no one completely, but it gives everyone something to do. Action is better than paralysis. As the gathering disperses, small groups cluster together, still debating. The engineers are already sketching in the dirt, planning new construction. The hunters are comparing notes about inland routes. The traders are discussing which settlements to contact first. And the elders, the knowledge keepers, are looking at the sky. Because there's something else they haven't mentioned in the public gathering. Something they're not quite ready to voice as a concern. The sky itself has been strange lately. Colors at sunset that they've never seen before. The moon appearing slightly larger or slightly smaller than it should. Atmospheric phenomena that don't match any of their records. It's as if the heavens are trying to warn them. But warn them of what? And more importantly, is there anything they can do about it? The youngest apprentice astronomer, barely past childhood, asks the question that none of the adults want to voice. "Teacher," she says quietly, "what if it's not just the water? What if everything is changing?" The old astronomer looks at her student and sees herself at that age. Curious, brave enough to ask the terrifying questions. "Then we must change with it," she says. "Or we will be left behind." She doesn't say the rest. Doesn't say what left behind might mean. But they both know. They've both heard the stories about the great extinction at the end of the Ice Age, about the massive animals that failed to adapt, about the people who stayed in the old hunting grounds even as the herds disappeared, about civilizations that believed they were eternal right up until the moment they vanished. The stars wheel overhead, unchanged and unchangeable, or so they appear. But even the stars, the elders know, can lie. Chapter 4. The Deluge. Catastrophe. The first wave comes from the rivers. It's spring, the time when snowmelt from distant mountains swells the waterways, when the people have always known to expect higher water. They've prepared for it, as they do every year. The canals are clear. The embankments are reinforced. The storage houses are stocked with supplies, in case anyone needs to wait out a few days of flooding. But this year is different. The water comes earlier than expected, and it doesn't stop. Day after day, the river rises. The normal spring high watermark is passed, then exceeded, then left far behind. The canals that usually handle overflow are running at capacity, then beyond. The water is moving fast, carrying debris, whole trees, chunks of ice, dead animals. Something has happened upstream. Something massive. The engineers work frantically, building up the embankments with whatever materials they can gather. Stones, logs, packed earth. The entire community turns out to help, forming lines to pass materials, working through the night by firelight. For a while, it seems like they might hold it back. Then a section of embankment gives way. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a small breach, a trickle at first. But water finds weakness the way fire finds fuel. The trickle becomes a stream. The stream becomes a torrent. In hours, a whole district is flooded. The water is cold, glacier, melt cold. And it's carrying mud, thick, heavy sediment that coats everything it touches. When it recedes, and it does recede, eventually, it leaves behind a layer of silt that buries ground, floor storage, clogs canals, ruins anything that couldn't be moved to higher ground. They survive this first wave. Most of the houses are built on platforms high enough to stay dry. Most of the food stores are safe, But the damage is extensive. Canals need to be redug, embankments rebuilt, crops in the low-lying fields are destroyed, and everyone knows the same thing without saying it aloud. If this is the new normal, the settlement cannot survive here. But before they can even begin to recover, the second wave arrives. This one comes from the ocean. It starts with the wind. A storm rolling in from the sea, larger and more violent than anyone living has experienced. The sky turns a greenish black. The waves begin to build, while the storm is still miles offshore. The fishing boats that are out when the storm hits don't all make it back. The people on shore watch helplessly as the winds and waves batter the vessels. Some capsize. Some are driven onto rocks. A few, their crews skilled and lucky, manage to ride it out and limp home hours later, with tails of waves higher than houses. But the storm itself is just the beginning. As the winds push the water toward shore, the ocean begins to rise. This isn't the tide. The tide is predictable, manageable. This is a storm surge, a wall of water driven by hurricane-force winds piling up against the coast, with nowhere to go but inland. The surge hits at high tide. The water comes up fast, faster than people can react, faster than they can secure their belongings or evacuate the most vulnerable. The lowest districts flood within minutes. The docks are underwater. The fish, processing areas, are swept clean. And this water is salty. When it recedes, it leaves salt behind. Salt that soaks into the soil. Salt that kills crops. Salt that contaminates fresh water wells. Salt that makes the land itself hostile to the plants and animals the people depend on. The damage from the surge is devastating. But more than that, it's different from the river flooding. The river brought fresh water, destructive, yes, but not poisonous. The sea brings salt. Salt changes everything. The community responds with characteristic determination. They clean up. They rebuild. They dig new wells farther inland, where the salt hasn't reached. They carefully scrape the salt-contaminated soil from their fields and replace it with clean earth carried from higher ground. It takes months. Months during which food is scarce, during which the trade network falters, because this settlement has nothing to trade, during which people begin to look inland more seriously, scouting locations for relocation. The council meets again. The debate is different now, less theoretical, more urgent. Many are ready to move. The engineers are outvoted. Plans are made to evacuate the most vulnerable first, the very young, the very old, to inland sites that the scouts have identified. They'll do it in phases, they decide. Maintain a presence here while establishing a new settlement inland. Gradual transition. Preserve what they can of the old ways while adapting to new circumstances. It's a good plan. Reasonable. Cautious. They begin implementing it immediately. And then the third wave comes. This one has no warning. It happens at night. The sound wakes them first. A roar in the distance, like wind through a canyon, but deeper, constant, growing louder. People emerge from their houses, confused. The sky is clear. No storm. The stars are visible, though the moon has already set. What could be making that sound? Then someone near the river screams. The water is rising. Not flowing, rising. Moving upstream. Defying gravity and current, and everything that water should do. This is not a flood. This is something else. In the distance, upriver, they can see it now. A line across the water, white in the starlight, foam and spray, and it's moving toward them like a living thing. A wall of water, not a wave that will rise and fall, not a surge that will advance and retreat. A wall, a moving mountain of water that is simply coming, unstoppable, inexorable. Someone is ringing the alarm bell, the deep bronze tone that means catastrophe. Everyone knows this sound. They've drilled for this, though they never truly believed it would happen. Evacuate to high ground. Take nothing. Just run. Families are pouring out of houses. Parents grabbing children. The young helping the elderly. People streaming toward the hills behind the settlement, toward the stone circle, toward anything above the river plain. But some people hesitate. The engineer runs toward his beloved canals, thinking perhaps he can open sluices, divert the flow somehow. An elder runs into the great circular structure, trying to save the carved records, the accumulated astronomical observations of generations. A mother runs back toward her home because she's left something precious, a carving made by a child who died years ago, the last physical memory of that lost child. These few seconds of hesitation cost them everything. The wall of water hits the settlement like a physical blow. It doesn't gradually flood, it demolishes. The first structures are simply swept away, platforms and posts and walls disintegrating as if they were made of grass, not timber. The sound is overwhelming, a grinding, crashing, roaring chaos that drowns out screams, drowns out thought itself. Those who made it to high ground turn to watch their world end. The water is filled with debris. Not just wood from the settlement, but massive ice chunks, boulders, entire trees, still rooted in clods of frozen earth. This water has come from somewhere far away, somewhere cold, bringing the destruction of distant places with it. In minutes, the settlement is gone. Just gone. The carefully engineered canals are scoured clean, the earthwork embankments erased, the docks and warehouses, and homes reduced to splinters tumbling in the current. And the water keeps coming. It's not just destroying the settlement. It's reclaiming the land itself. The water rises 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. It keeps rising until the spot where the settlement stood is deep beneath the surface, until the hills where people have taken refuge become islands in an expanding sea. Only then does it stop rising. But it doesn't recede. This isn't a flood that will drain away. This is the new ocean, the new coastline, the new world. The survivors huddle on what's now an island, watching the sun rise over water, where yesterday there was land, watching pieces of their lives drift past. A carved doorpost, a child's toy boat, a section of decorated pottery. The current carries it all away, out to the open ocean, where it will sink and be buried in sediment, and forgotten. Someone is weeping. Someone else is silent in shock. Children are asking questions that no one can answer. Where will we live? What will we eat? Will the water go down? The elders are counting, trying to determine who made it out and who didn't. The numbers are grim. More than half the settlement is gone. Not dead necessarily. Some might have survived, might have made it to other high ground. But separated. Lost. Alone in a suddenly alien landscape, one of the Star Watchers, a young woman who made it out carrying nothing but the carved stick she uses to track days, looks at the transformed world and understands something. This has happened before, she says quietly. The old stories, the great flood, the world that was lost. This is what they meant. An elder nods slowly. And now we become the ones who tell the story. We become the survivors who warn the future. But first, they have to survive. They're stranded on an island that used to be a hilltop. They have no food except what they carried, no tools except what was in their hands when they ran. No boats, no fishing gear, no stored supplies. Around them, other hilltops have become islands. They can see people there, other survivors, other groups, separated by water that's too deep and cold and fast-moving to cross safely. In the days that follow, some people do try to swim to other islands, or to what might be the new mainland. Some make it, some don't. The water is cold enough to kill in minutes. Slowly, painfully, the survivors organize. They signal to other island groups using smoke during the day, fires at night. They fashion crude rafts from driftwood. They begin the dangerous work of reconnecting, of consolidating on the largest islands, of moving toward what they hope is solid ground. It takes weeks. Weeks during which they survive on rainwater and whatever fish they can catch with improvised gear. Weeks during which the very old and very young succumb to cold, hunger, despair. Weeks during which the world they knew recedes into memory and myth. Eventually, groups of survivors make it to true high ground, to the interior hills and mountains, to places that will never flood because they're high enough, far enough from the doomed coast. They carry almost nothing physical. The carved records are lost. The astronomical observations accumulated over generations are gone. The pottery, the tools, the carefully engineered infrastructure, all of it is underwater or scattered across the ocean floor. But they carry something else. They carry memories, skills, knowledge encoded in their minds and muscles, the understanding of seasons and stars, of water and weather, of how to work stone and build structures, and navigate by the heavens. They carry the grief of what was lost and the determination to survive. And they carry the story of a time when their people lived along the coast in great settlements, when they built with stone and wood, when they traded across vast distances, when they read the stars and engineered the water itself, the story of how the world changed in a single night, how the ice melted and the waters rose, and everything was swept away. They will tell this story to their children. Their children will tell it to their grandchildren. It will become myth, religion, warning. It will spread from group to group, culture to culture, until people all around the world have some version of it. A flood, a catastrophe, a world that was lost. And standing in the ruins of everything they built, looking down at water covering land, where they used to live, the survivors make themselves a promise. They will rebuild, different, perhaps, in new places, with new methods, but they will rebuild. They will remember what was lost, and they will teach the future. Because that's what humans do. We survive. We remember. We continue, even when the whole world drowns. Chapter 5. The Mystery. Why no evidence? Let's step out of the story for a moment and return to our world, our time. You're sitting somewhere comfortable, listening to this narrative, and perhaps you're wondering, if all of this happened, where's the proof? Where are the ruins? The artifacts? The undeniable evidence that would convince skeptical archaeologists? It's a fair question, and the answer is simpler than you might think. The ocean took everything. Let me explain what happens when sea level rises 400 feet over the course of several thousand years. First, understand the scale. 400 feet is taller than a 30-story building. Imagine standing at street level in a city and looking up to the 30th floor. Now imagine that entire column of space filled with seawater. That's how much ocean now covers the lands we've been describing. But it's not just the depth, it's the area. When Ice Age glaciers held trillions of gallons of water locked up as ice, the continental shelves were exposed. These are the shallow underwater plains that extend outward from every continent before the ocean floor drops away into the deep. On average, these shelves extend 50 to 100 miles from the current coastline. In some places, much farther. That's millions of square miles of what was once dry, habitable land, all of it now underwater. The English Channel between Britain and France. That was a river valley where people lived. The Persian Gulf. A fertile plain with rivers. The waters between Indonesia and Australia. A land bridge with forests and grasslands. The Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia. Dry land connecting two continents. All gone. All submerged. Now, let's talk about what happens to evidence when it spends 12,000 years underwater. Wood rots. Even hardwood, even wood preserved by oil or resin, will eventually succumb to marine organisms. Shipworms, bacteria, fungi, they consume organic material. A wooden post can survive a few hundred years underwater, in the right conditions, maybe 1,000 in exceptional circumstances. But 12,000. Nothing remains but perhaps a shadow in the sediment where the wood once stood. Rope, leather, fabric, basketry, all the organic materials that humans use extensively, decompose even faster. Within decades, they're gone. Within centuries, there's not even a trace. Bone survives longer than soft tissue, but it too degrades. Especially in saltwater. Especially when it's tumbled by currents, covered and uncovered by shifting sediments, dissolved by the slight acidity of seawater. Human bones from 12,000 years ago, left on the ocean floor, would be fragments at best. More likely, nothing at all. What about stone? Surely stone survives. Yes. But here's the problem with stone. A stone tool on the ocean floor looks like a stone. Even worked stone, even carefully shaped obsidian blades and scrapers, can be difficult to distinguish from naturally fractured rock once it's been tumbled by currents and covered with marine growth. Unless you can examine it closely, preferably hold it in your hand, you might swim right past it. And stone structures. Remember, We're not talking about the pyramids here. We're talking about foundations, platforms, embankments, arrangements of stone that were impressive in context, but that, scattered by millennia of currents and covered by sediment, might now look like natural rock formations. Which brings us to sediment. Rivers carry sediment to the ocean constantly. Mud, silt, sand, all of it settles on the ocean floor, building up layer by layer. Over 12,000 years, in many coastal areas, dozens of feet of sediment have accumulated. Entire landscapes are buried. Imagine trying to find a settlement that's not just underwater, but under 20 feet of mud at the bottom of the ocean. You'd need to know exactly where to look. You'd need sophisticated sonar to penetrate the sediment. You'd need equipment to excavate underwater through layers of compacted mud. You'd need funding, time, legal permissions to disturb the ocean floor. We're only just beginning to develop these capabilities. And even now, they're expensive and difficult. Consider the economics of archaeology. Most archaeological work is done on land, where it's relatively easy and cheap to excavate. Dig a hole, screen the dirt, record what you find. Underwater archaeology is exponentially more difficult. Every minute underwater requires planning, equipment, support staff. Dive times are limited. Visibility is often poor. The ocean is actively hostile to the work. So where do underwater archaeologists focus their limited resources? On shipwrecks, on historical sites from the last few thousand years, on submerged cities from classical antiquity, places where we know from written records that settlements existed, on underwater caves where the environment is stable and preservation is good. They're not systematically surveying the continental shelves, looking for evidence of Ice Age settlements. Not because they don't think anything's there, but because the task is simply too vast. Think about this. The Mediterranean Sea is approximately 1 million square miles. The underwater areas, that would have been dry land during the Ice Age, represent hundreds of thousands of square miles of that. Even if you had unlimited funding and equipment, it would take decades to survey it properly. And the Mediterranean is just one body of water. Worldwide, we're talking about millions of square miles of submerged continental shelf that need to be explored. We've surveyed less than 5% of the ocean floor in any detail. Less than 5%. And most of that survey work is focused on deep ocean basins, not the coastal shelves where Ice Age settlements would have been. We're looking for needles in a haystack the size of continents. But here's what's fascinating. In the tiny fraction of submerged coastal areas we have explored, we are finding things. Off the coast of British Columbia, underwater archaeologists found stone tools and fire pits beneath 300 feet of water, dating back to the end of the Ice Age. The preservation was remarkable because the sites were buried quickly in silt, protecting them from decay. In the Black Sea, explorers found preserved wooden structures from ancient settlements, submerged when sea levels rose after the Ice Age. The wood survived because the deep Black Sea is anoxic, no oxygen, no decay organisms. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay, sonar surveys revealed linear formations that some researchers believe could be remnants of structures. The interpretation is controversial, but the formations are real. Near Japan, the Yonaguni formations, massive stone structures that appear to be carved or arranged, sit beneath the waves. Geologists debate whether they're natural or artificial. That debate itself is telling. The formations are ambiguous enough that experts genuinely cannot agree. Off Florida, in sinkholes and underwater caves, divers have found human remains and artifacts from the Ice Age, preserved in the unique environment of the cave systems. These are accidental discoveries, found by chance, by divers exploring for other reasons, by sonar surveys looking for modern hazards or resources. What might we find if we actually looked? Systematically, with modern technology, with the specific goal of understanding Ice Age coastal settlements? We don't know, because we haven't done it yet. Let's talk about the biases built into archaeology as a discipline. Archaeology is a science of accidents. We find what has been preserved by chance. We excavate where it's convenient, legal, and funded. We interpret based on what we've found, but we're always aware, or we should be, that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The problem is, human psychology doesn't work that way. If we haven't found something, we tend to assume it didn't exist. For generations, The story of human civilization went like this. For most of our history, humans were simple hunter-gatherers, living in small bands, migrating seasonally, with no permanent settlements and no complex social organization. Then, about 5,000 years ago, agriculture was invented. With agriculture came permanent settlements, then cities, then writing, then civilization. This narrative was clean, linear, satisfying. It was also based on what we'd found, and what we'd found was biased towards certain types of sites in certain types of locations. We excavated in deserts, where preservation is good and sites are visible on the surface. We excavated in river valleys, where historical records told us civilizations had existed. We excavated where construction projects accidentally uncovered artifacts, where farmers ploughed up pottery, where erosion exposed ancient layers. We didn't excavate underwater. We didn't excavate in deep jungle. We didn't excavate in areas that seemed unlikely to yield results. And then we started finding things that didn't fit the narrative. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, discovered in 1994, is perhaps the most dramatic example. Here was a massive stone structure complex, circles of carved pillars, sophisticated planning, clear evidence of organized labor, and symbolic thought, and it dated to 11,600 years ago. Before agriculture, before pottery, before any permanent settlements that we'd previously known about. Göbekli Tepe shattered the linear narrative. It proved that complex organization, monumental construction, and sophisticated symbolic systems could exist before what we'd called civilization. And here's what's haunting about Göbekli Tepe. It was deliberately buried, filled in with rubble, preserved intentionally. Why would people do that? One theory is that they were preserving knowledge, that they knew catastrophe was coming. Perhaps they'd survived the Younger Dryas catastrophe, and they wanted to leave a record, a message in stone that might outlast them. Göbekli Tepe is on high ground. It survived because it was never flooded. It was found because the stones protruded slightly from the surface, catching the attention of a surveyor. What might exist at lower elevations? On the coastal plains, buried not intentionally but by rising seas and accumulating sediment? We don't know. Other discoveries are forcing similar revisions to our understanding. Stone tools found in North America that predate the previously accepted timeline for human arrival. Sophisticated astronomical knowledge encoded in megalithic structures across Europe. Evidence of long-distance trade networks in the Ice Age. Genetic data suggesting population movements, and mixing that doesn't match our previous models. Each discovery prompts the same reaction from mainstream archaeology. Initial skepticism, demands for additional evidence, heated debate, then, eventually, grudging acceptance and revision of timelines. This is how science should work. We update our understanding as new evidence emerges. But there's a cost to this conservative approach. How many discoveries are dismissed because they don't fit current paradigms? How many sites remain unexplored because they're in unlikely locations? How many artifacts are misidentified because we're not looking for evidence of complexity in Ice Age contexts? The bias runs deep. Archaeology programs train students to excavate on land. Funding agencies prioritize projects with clear research questions based on existing knowledge. Permits are easier to obtain for work in accessible locations. Publications favor incremental advances over paradigm, challenging claims. The entire system is optimized to find more of what we've already found. It's not malicious. It's practical. Resources are limited. We focus them where they're most likely to yield results based on what we already know. But it means we might be missing an entire chapter of human history. Consider this thought experiment. Imagine that modern civilization collapsed tomorrow. A catastrophe, pandemic, nuclear war, climate catastrophe, asteroid impact, whatever. Imagine that humans survived, but were reduced to small, scattered populations, with no infrastructure, no technology, no cities. Now imagine archaeologists 12,000 years in the future, trying to reconstruct our civilization. What would survive? Not our cities of glass and steel and concrete. Those materials degrade. Skyscrapers would collapse within centuries. Roads would crack and be overgrown. Dams would fail. Bridges would fall. Within 1,000 years, most surface traces of our civilization would be gone, especially if, like us, that future civilization searched primarily on land, in deserts, in areas where preservation is good. They might find fragments, plastic buried in landfills. Plastic survives a long time. Some ceramics, some stone foundations of particularly massive buildings, scattered metal tools, corroded beyond recognition. Could they, from those fragments, reconstruct the complexity of our civilization? Our global trade networks, our scientific knowledge, our art and literature and philosophy? Probably not. They'd know we existed. They'd know we worked metal and made sophisticated tools. But the details, the depth of our knowledge, the scope of our accomplishments, lost, simply lost. Now add one more factor. What if our cities had been on coastlines that are now underwater? What if the places where we concentrated our wealth, our knowledge, our infrastructure, were all beneath 400 feet of ocean? The future archaeologists would find almost nothing. A few scattered sites in the interior, perhaps some stone tools. They might conclude we were simple hunter-gatherers with some basic stoneworking skills. They'd be wrong, profoundly wrong, but they'd never know it. This is the situation we face when we try to understand human civilization 12,000 years ago. We're looking for keys under the streetlight, not because we lost them there, but because that's where the light is. The places where we'd most expect complex societies to develop, coastal zones with abundant resources and easy transportation, are now invisible to us, buried beneath the sea. And until we systematically explore those drowned landscapes, we're working from an incomplete picture. Maybe there was a sophisticated coastal civilization during the Ice Age. Maybe there wasn't. But we can't answer that question definitively until we actually look in the places where such a civilization would have been. Until then, we're just guessing, based on fragments, on accidents of preservation, on the tiny fraction of the past that happened to survive in places where we happen to look. The ocean keeps its secrets, and we've barely begun to ask the right questions. Chapter 6. The Survivors. Legacy. Let's return to the survivors. They're scattered now across the highlands, the interior forests, the mountain valleys. Small groups, separated from each other by the new geography the floods have created. Some groups are larger, 50, 60 people who manage to evacuate together. Others are just a handful. A family. A few individuals who found each other in the chaos. They're alive, but everything else is gone. The first winter is the hardest. These are people who knew how to live on the coast, how to read tides and predict fish migrations, how to navigate by stars over open water, how to harvest shellfish and preserve ocean fish, and build boats. But now they're inland, in forests where different plants grow, where different animals roam. They know the principles, how to find water, how to make fire, how to work stone. But the details are all wrong. The plants they knew as food sources don't grow here. The fishing techniques they perfected over generations are useless without access to the ocean. The seasonal patterns they memorized, when to expect certain fish runs, when specific shellfish are safe to eat, don't apply. They have to learn. Fast. The elders, the knowledge keepers, become more precious than ever. They're the ones who remember the old stories about living inland. Their grandparents' grandparents, before the settlements became so successful, before everything was optimized for coastal life. There's knowledge buried in those old memories. What plants are edible, how to track game, how to preserve meat without access to salt, how to find stone suitable for tools. The younger people learn with desperate intensity. There's no room for error, no safety net. Get it wrong and you starve. Get it right and you survive another season. Some groups don't make it. The very isolated ones, the ones without enough diversity of knowledge, without elders who remember the old ways. They struggle through one winter, maybe two, and then they're gone, absorbed into other groups, or simply fading away in the harsh interior. But other groups adapt. They find valleys with good water and game. They make contact with peoples who've always lived inland, who never built coastal cities, who view these refugees with suspicion at first, and then, slowly, with curiosity. Because the coastal refugees have something valuable. They have knowledge. Not coastal knowledge, That's obsolete now. But other knowledge, deeper knowledge. They know how to organize labor for large projects. They know how to plan seasons in advance, how to store surplus food. They know astronomical observation techniques that let them predict equinoxes and solstices with precision. They know engineering principles for managing water, even if the specific applications need to be adapted. And they know how to work stone in ways that astonish the inland peoples. Watch a coastal refugee making tools. The precision, the efficiency, the way they can look at a piece of stone and see the blade inside it, then strike it free with 3 or 4 perfectly placed blows. This isn't luck. This is skill refined over generations. The inland peoples have their own knowledge. They know these forests intimately. They know which game migrates where and when. They know medicinal plants. They know how to survive harsh winters. An exchange begins. Tentative at first, the refugees trade their knowledge for acceptance, for territory, for the right to settle in lands that aren't theirs by birth. Some groups merge entirely. The coastal peoples intermarry with the inland peoples. Within a few generations, the distinction blurs. The children speak both languages, know both sets of traditions, combine both knowledge systems. Other groups maintain their identity longer. They settle in specific valleys and pass down their stories with particular intensity. We came from the coast. We built great settlements. The waters rose and we survived. Their descendants will tell these stories for thousands of years. But something happens to the knowledge as generations pass. Without the context, without the actual coastal cities to point to, without the infrastructure to maintain, some of it fades. The astronomical observations that made sense when you had a permanent stone circle to mark positions become harder to preserve. The engineering knowledge that was practical when you were building water management systems becomes theoretical, abstract. What remains are fragments, pieces, echoes, a technique for working stone that seems unnecessarily sophisticated for simple tools, but that makes sense if your ancestors were building large structures. An obsession with tracking stars that seems excessive for a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but that makes sense if your ancestors navigated by them. A story about a great flood that seems like myth, but that might be history. The inland peoples notice these peculiarities. They incorporate what's useful. They're puzzled by the rest. Why do these coastal refugees know so much about the stars? Why do they insist on building permanent structures when a seasonal round of camps makes more sense? Why do they tell stories about stone circles and great canals? The refugees can't fully explain. Even they, the first-generation survivors, are losing the context. Their children, who never saw the coastal settlements, hear the stories but can't quite grasp what they mean. By the third generation, the stories are definitely mythology. Grand cities that might be exaggeration. Engineering feats that sound impossible. Knowledge that seems magical. But buried in those myths, there's truth. Now let's jump forward. Thousands of years forward. The coastline has stabilized. The Ice Age is definitely over. Sea levels have risen to approximately where they are today. The world has warmed. Forests have replaced tundra. New ecosystems have established themselves. And humans have spread across every habitable continent. They're living in small bands, mostly. Hunter-gatherers following seasonal rounds, moving with the game and the plant harvests. Some groups are beginning to experiment with cultivation of useful plants. The very earliest hints of agriculture are appearing in a few favored locations. And almost all of them have a story about a flood. The details vary wildly from culture to culture, but the core is remarkably consistent. There was a time before, a time when things were different. Then came water, a great flood, devastating. World, changing. Most people died. A few survived. In Mesopotamia, they tell the story of Utnapishtim, who survived a flood sent by the gods by building a great boat. When the waters receded, he sent out birds to find land. In the Hebrew tradition, the story becomes Noah's Ark. 40 days and 40 nights of rain, water covering the whole world. A family and animals surviving on a boat to repopulate the earth. In India, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, warned by a fish about an impending flood. He builds a boat, survives, becomes the progenitor of humanity after the deluge. Greek mythology remembers Deucalion, who survived a flood sent by Zeus by building an ark on the advice of his father, Prometheus. Native American traditions across both continents contain flood narratives. The details differ. Some speak of a hero who dives to the bottom of the waters to bring up mud and create new land. Others tell of people escaping to high mountains. But the flood itself appears again and again. In Australia, Aboriginal traditions speak of times when the sea rose and swallowed coastal lands, when people had to move to higher ground. Hawaiian legends tell of a great flood, Nu'u, building a boat to survive. Chinese mythology includes Gun-Yu fighting floods, eventually teaching people how to channel and control water. These stories span the globe. They appear in cultures that had no contact with each other, that developed independently, that were separated by oceans and mountains. Skeptics say this is because floods are common. Every culture experiences flooding. Of course, they tell flood stories, but read the stories carefully. They're not talking about normal floods, not seasonal river flooding or storm surges. They're talking about world-changing catastrophes, waters that rise and don't recede, events that mark a clear division between before and after, and many of them include specific details that are interesting. Multiple traditions describe the survivors bringing knowledge with them from the before times, teaching agriculture, teaching astronomy, teaching building techniques. In Mesopotamian tradition, the 7 Apkallu, wise sages from before the flood, taught civilization to humanity after the waters receded. In Egyptian mythology, Thoth and other gods who survived from previous ages taught writing and knowledge to humans. Mesoamerican traditions speak of Quetzalcoatl and other civilizing figures who came from across the sea, bringing knowledge of agriculture and astronomy and building. These are called culture hero myths, figures who taught primitive humans how to be civilized. Mainstream interpretation says these are just stories. Myths created to explain how knowledge originated, personified as divine or semi-divine teachers. But what if they're memories? Distorted, mythologized, but fundamentally memories. What if the gods who taught agriculture and astronomy were actually survivors from coastal civilizations? Refugees who carried knowledge from before the floods and shared it with the inland peoples they settled among. You can't prove it from myths alone. Myths are unreliable. They change with each telling. They incorporate new elements. They merge with other stories. By the time they're written down, often thousands of years after the events they supposedly describe, they're hopelessly contaminated. But the universality of the flood narrative is striking, and the timing is interesting. Many of these myths, when you try to extract any chronological information from them, seem to point to a period around 10 to 12,000 years ago. The end of the Ice Age, the Younger Dryas period, the time when we know, from geological evidence, that sea levels were rising dramatically. Could the myths be cultural memories of real events? It's possible. Humans have good memories for catastrophe. Traumatic events get embedded deeply in cultural narratives. They get passed down with intensity because they contain survival information. The waters can rise. The coast is not safe. Be prepared to flee. That's valuable knowledge. Worth preserving. Worth encoding in stories so compelling that it gets repeated for generations. But there's more to these flood myths than just water rose. Many of them include descriptions of what was lost. Cities, civilizations, golden ages, times of plenty that ended with the flood. Plato's account of Atlantis, recorded in the 4th century BCE, but supposedly based on Egyptian records, describes an advanced maritime civilization destroyed by catastrophe and sinking beneath the waves. The date Plato gives, 9,000 years before his time, would place it roughly at the end of the Ice Age. Most scholars dismiss Atlantis as fiction. Plato probably invented it as a philosophical thought experiment. But what if he was working from real sources? What if the Egyptian priests he claimed to have consulted were themselves working from older records, older stories, memories of real coastal civilizations swallowed by rising seas? We can't know. The line between history and myth is too blurred. But consider this. If a coastal civilization was destroyed 12,000 years ago by rising seas, and if survivors spread inland carrying stories and knowledge, what would those stories look like after being passed down for hundreds of generations? They'd be distorted, mythologized, mixed with other stories, decorated with supernatural elements, changed to fit new contexts and new purposes. They'd look exactly like the flood myths we have, not proof, but consistent, suggestive, a pattern that makes you wonder. And when you combine the myths with the geological evidence of rising seas, with the archaeological mysteries of sites like Göbekli Tepe, with the underwater anomalies we're starting to find on submerged coastlines, the picture becomes more interesting. Not definitive, not conclusive, but interesting enough to deserve investigation. Interesting enough to make you question the simple narrative of human history. Interesting enough to wonder what else might be hidden beneath the waves, waiting to be discovered. The survivors left us more than myths. They left us questions. And maybe, if we look in the right places, we'll find answers. Chapter 7. The Clues. Modern Evidence. Let's talk about the discovery that changed everything. 1994. Southeastern Turkey. A German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt is surveying hilltops near the town of Şanlıurfa. He's looking for nothing in particular, just doing routine survey work, the kind of methodical exploration that archaeologists do in regions that haven't been thoroughly studied. He climbs a hill that locals call Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill. Nothing special about it. Just another low rise in the landscape. But there's something odd. The ground is littered with worked stone, flint chips, evidence of human activity. Schmidt starts digging test trenches. And within hours, he realizes he's found something extraordinary. Massive stone pillars, carved with reliefs of animals, arranged in circles, buried deliberately under tons of rubble. He keeps digging. And what emerges over the next 2 decades of excavation is a site that shouldn't exist according to everything archaeology thought it knew about human development. Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old, give or take a few centuries. That date is important. 11,600 years ago, right at the end of the Younger Dryas period, right when the climate was stabilizing, right when the floods would have been finishing their work of transforming coastlines. And what existed at this inland hilltop? Not a settlement. There's no evidence anyone lived there permanently. No houses. No trash heaps. No signs of domestic life. Instead, there are circles. Multiple circles, carved from bedrock and enhanced with massive T-shaped stone pillars. These pillars are enormous, some weighing 10 tons or more. They're carved from limestone quarries nearby, shaped with stone tools, transported to the site, erected in precise positions. The largest circle discovered so far has pillars 18 feet tall, and they're decorated, carved with exquisite reliefs of animals. Foxes, lions, scorpions, snakes, wild boars, birds. The craftsmanship is sophisticated. These aren't crude scratches. These are skilled artistic renderings that show deep observation of nature. Some pillars have abstract symbols carved on them, patterns that might be proto-writing, or might be decorative, or might mean something we don't yet understand. The circles are aligned. Some researchers argue they track astronomical positions, the rising and setting points of certain stars or constellations. The evidence is debated, but the precision of the construction suggests the builders were paying attention to celestial geometry. Here's what makes Göbekli Tepe revolutionary. This level of construction requires organization. You don't move 10-ton pillars and arrange them in precise circles without planning, without leadership, without coordinated labor. You need lots of people working together toward a common goal. Traditional archaeology said that kind of organization only emerged after agriculture. After people settled down, started farming, created food surpluses that allowed specialization and hierarchy. But Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture. There's no evidence of domesticated plants or animals at the site. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. They were living on wild resources, and yet they organized themselves to create monumental architecture. This shouldn't be possible, not according to the old models. But there it is. Undeniable. Real. Schmidt spent the rest of his life excavating Göbekli Tepe. He died in 2014, but the work continues, and the more they uncover, the stranger it gets. The site was used for perhaps 1,500 years. Multiple generations building and rebuilding, creating new circles, enhancing old ones. And then, deliberately, they buried it. They filled the circles with rubble, carefully, reverently, creating a hill that preserved the structures beneath. Why would you bury something so precious? Something that clearly took enormous effort to create. One theory: they were preserving it. They knew something was changing. Maybe they'd survived the Younger Dryas catastrophe. Maybe they'd come from the flooded coasts. Maybe they were preserving knowledge for the future, encoding it in stone, then protecting it beneath earth. Another theory: the site was sacred, and there's a time limit to sacredness. When the purpose was fulfilled, you bury it and move on. We don't know. We may never know. But here's what we do know. Göbekli Tepe proves that complex social organization, sophisticated building techniques, and symbolic thought existed before civilization as we traditionally defined it. It proves that hunter-gatherers could be more than nomadic bands scraping out survival. It proves that the narrative of linear progress from simple to complex is wrong. And it raises questions. Uncomfortable questions. If hunter-gatherers could build Göbekli Tepe inland, on high ground, what might they have built on the coasts? In the fertile river deltas, in the resource-rich environments that are now 400 feet underwater, Göbekli Tepe survived because it's on a hill, because it was buried and protected, because it was far enough from the coast that the rising waters never reached it. What didn't survive? What was lost in the places we can't easily reach? Schmidt himself believed Göbekli Tepe was built by people who had experienced catastrophe, that it was, in some sense, a memorial, a statement in stone that said, "We were here, we knew things, we built this so you would remember." That's speculation. But it's informed speculation from a man who spent 20 years studying the site. And Göbekli Tepe isn't alone anymore. Since its discovery, other similar sites have been found in the region. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan Tepesi, a whole complex of megalithic structures from the same period, all in southeastern Turkey. This wasn't an isolated achievement. It was a culture, a tradition of monumental building that we're only now beginning to understand. All of it from the end of the Younger Dryas. All of it from people who supposedly couldn't organize themselves to build anything permanent. All of it making us question what else we might have missed. Now let's go underwater. Because while Göbekli Tepe is impressive, it's on dry land where archaeologists can study it. What about the places that flooded? What have we found there? The answer is fragments, tantalizing hints, formations that make you wonder. Start with Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan. In 1986, a dive tour operator was exploring the waters near Yonaguni Island, looking for good spots to see hammerhead sharks. Instead, he found something else. Massive stone formations on the ocean floor, terraces, right angles, what appeared to be steps carved into bedrock. The structures sit in about 75 feet of water. When geologists examined the site, opinions split. Some argued these were natural formations, sandstone bedded in layers that fractured along regular planes, creating the illusion of artificial structure. Others argued the regularity was too precise, the right angles too perfect. Some features, like what appears to be a carved face or straight channels, too specific to be natural. The debate continues. But here's what's undisputed. If those formations are natural, they're remarkably regular. If they're artificial, they're at least 10,000 years old, because that's when the area was last above water. Move to the Mediterranean. Near the coast of Lebanon, underwater explorers have found massive stone blocks in the ocean. We're talking blocks weighing hundreds of tons, apparently quarried and shaped, lying on the seabed. Some of these blocks are clearly from known historical structures, ancient harbors, Roman or Phoenician construction that sank or was submerged by later sea level changes. But some are older, much older, from depths and contexts that suggest Ice Age antiquity. Again, the interpretation is debated. Natural. Artificial. If artificial, how old? The answers aren't clear because the investigation is difficult. These sites are underwater, often in rough seas, requiring specialized equipment and expertise to study properly. In the waters between India and Sri Lanka, there's a chain of limestone shoals called Adam's Bridge. Some formations appear regular enough that researchers have questioned whether they're entirely natural. Sonar surveys have revealed linear features on the seabed nearby. Off the west coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay, a controversial discovery was announced in 2001. Side-scan sonar revealed what appeared to be geometric patterns on the ocean floor, grid-like formations, possible structures. Artifacts brought up from the area, wood, pottery, stone tools, were carbon dated. Some dates came back as 9,000 years old. If accurate, that would suggest human activity in the area when it was still above water. The scientific community reacted with intense skepticism. The sonar images were ambiguous. The dating could be contaminated. The interpretations were premature. Fair criticisms, all. But also, we should note, the site hasn't been thoroughly investigated. The depths involved, the water conditions, the technical challenges, all make systematic archaeology difficult. So we're left with questions. Interesting formations that might be natural, might be artificial. Dates that might be accurate, might be contaminated. Interpretations that might be correct, might be wishful thinking. But the formations are real. The underwater features exist. Whether they're natural or artificial is a question that deserves investigation, not dismissal. Across the Pacific, off the coast of California, underwater explorers have found what appear to be ancient shorelines, now submerged. Stone arrangements that might be natural, might be remnants of human activity. In the Black Sea, underwater archaeologists have found remarkably preserved wooden structures from ancient settlements submerged when sea levels rose after the Ice Age. The wood survived because the deep Black Sea is anoxic. Without oxygen, organisms that cause decay can't survive. These Black Sea sites prove that underwater preservation can be exceptional in the right conditions. Wooden posts, timbers, structures that would have rotted away completely in oxygenated water are frozen in time in the Black Sea depths. What might exist in other bodies of water with unusual preservation conditions? Off the coast of Cuba, sonar explorations revealed unusual formations at depths of 2,000 feet. Symmetrical patterns that some researchers interpreted as possible ruins. The depth makes investigation prohibitively expensive, and follow-up work has been limited. Are these structures natural formations, sonar artifacts? We don't know. And that's the theme. Again and again, we don't know. We have formations, we have features, we have sonar readings and side-scan images, and occasional artifacts dredged up from the bottom. We have hints, suggestions, possibilities. What we don't have is systematic investigation. We haven't mounted serious, well-funded expeditions to survey the continental shelves for evidence of Ice Age human activity. We haven't deployed the technology that would let us see through sediment to bedrock where structures might be buried. We found these sites by accident, by chance, by stumbling across them while looking for other things. What might we find if we actually looked? With intention, with resources, with the specific goal of understanding Ice Age coastal settlements. The technology exists. Deep-diving submarines, remotely operated vehicles, ground-penetrating sonar that can see through sediment, underwater excavation techniques. We've used these technologies to explore shipwrecks, to map the ocean floor for resource extraction, to search for lost historical sites. But we haven't used them systematically to search for Ice Age civilizations on the continental shelves. Not because scientists don't think anything's there. Many do. But because funding is limited and the task is enormous, and the waters involved are often in contested territories with complex legal issues about underwater archaeology. So the formations remain enigmatic, controversial, unexplained, waiting at the bottom of the ocean for someone to investigate them properly, waiting to tell us whether they're natural curiosities or human creations, waiting to reveal whether the ocean really did swallow the evidence of a lost coastal world. The clues are there, scattered across the submerged continental shelves, written in stone formations and buried sediment and the geometry of underwater features. We just haven't read them yet. Not fully, not carefully, but they're waiting. And perhaps, in the coming decades, as technology improves and interest grows, we'll finally begin to understand what they're trying to tell us. About a world that drowned. About people who built and dreamed and watch their creation slip beneath the waves. About human ingenuity that was lost, but not entirely forgotten. The ocean keeps its secrets. But secrets, eventually, have a way of surfacing. Chapter 8. The Reframe. Superadaptive. Let's pause and reconsider what we mean when we say advanced civilization. When most people hear that phrase, they picture technology, skyscrapers, computers, spacecraft, metal tools at minimum, writing, mathematics, the kind of advancement that leaves unmistakable archaeological traces. And when we don't find those traces from 12,000 years ago, we conclude there was no advanced civilization. But what if we're measuring advancement wrong? What if the coastal people we've been imagining weren't advanced in the sense of technology, but advanced in the sense of adaptation? Think about what it takes to thrive in a coastal environment for thousands of years. You need to understand tides with precision, the moon's cycles, the interaction between lunar gravity and ocean water, the difference between spring tides and neap tides, which shores flood during which conditions, where it's safe to build and where it's foolish. This is sophisticated astronomical and oceanographic knowledge. It doesn't require writing to encode. It doesn't require metal tools to apply. But it requires careful observation over generations and systematic teaching to preserve. You need to understand hydrology, how water flows, how to channel it, how to prevent flooding in some areas while ensuring adequate drainage in others, how to build embankments that withstand surge, how to dig canals that don't silt up or erode. This is engineering, real engineering, not primitive, just expressed in earth and stone, rather than concrete and steel. You need to understand food preservation, how to dry fish so it lasts months, how to ferment foods to prevent spoilage, how to smoke meat, how to store grains in ways that prevent rot and pest damage, how to maintain stockpiles that can carry a community through bad seasons. This is food science. Applied biochemistry. Again, no laboratory required. Just careful experimentation and cultural memory of what works. You need to understand navigation, how to read stars, how to use the sun's position, how to interpret ocean swells and understand which directions they indicate, how to memorize coastlines and recognize landmarks, how to judge weather from clouds and wind. This is what the Polynesians did. They navigated thousands of miles of open ocean without compasses or maps or GPS, using only their knowledge of stars, waves, birds, and clouds. We call this wayfinding, and it's so sophisticated that modern sailors with instruments still struggle to replicate it. Was this technology? No. Was this advanced? Absolutely. You need social organization, systems for resolving disputes without violence, methods for coordinating labor on large projects, ways of deciding who leads and who follows, traditions that maintain equity so the community doesn't fracture. Anthropologists study contemporary hunter-gatherer societies and find remarkably sophisticated social systems, gift economies that create obligation and relationship, consensus decision-making that maintains group cohesion, ritual systems that reinforce values and pass down knowledge. None of this leaves clear archaeological traces. But it's complex. It's advanced. It's the product of thousands of years of cultural evolution. Here's what I'm suggesting. The coastal civilization we've been imagining might not have been technologically advanced in ways we'd recognize. No metal, no writing, no structures that would obviously survive 12,000 years underwater. But they might have been advanced in ways that matter more for long-term survival. They were adapted, perfectly, elegantly adapted to their environment. They understood their world with deep, intimate knowledge. They'd spent millennia learning how to thrive in coastal environments. They'd refined techniques for aquaculture, for tidal prediction, for seasonal planning. They'd developed social systems that allowed large groups to live together peacefully. They'd created cultural technologies for passing down knowledge without writing. This is super adaptive, not super technological. And here's the thing about adaptation. It's invisible until you look for it. Watch an expert do something they've mastered. A chef knife handling, a carpenter measuring, a sailor reading the wind. The skill looks effortless, natural, simple. But it's not simple. It's the result of years of practice, building on generations of accumulated knowledge, refined and passed down through careful teaching. The coastal people would have looked simple to us if we could observe them. No obvious technology, no machines, just people living with their environment. But watch closely. Watch how they time their fishing to the exact right moment in the tide cycle. Watch how they've positioned their settlement to maximize sun exposure while minimizing flood risk. Watch how they've shaped their landscape with subtle terracing and water management that works with nature rather than against it. Watch how their children learn through play that teaches real skills. How their stories encode survival information. How their rituals mark astronomical positions and seasonal changes. This is sophisticated. This is advanced. Just not in ways that survive well archaeologically. Consider the Dutch. For 1,000 years, they've been managing water in the Low Countries. They've built dikes, canals, pumps. They've reclaimed land from the sea. They've created one of the most complex water management systems in the world. And they did most of this before modern technology. With muscle power, stone, wood, and accumulated knowledge, if the Netherlands flooded tomorrow and wasn't rediscovered for 12,000 years, what would survive? Some stone foundations, some pottery, scattered tools. Would archaeologists recognize the sophistication of Dutch water management from those fragments? Probably not. Now multiply that by 10,000 years. Add the corrosive effects of ocean submersion. Add sediment burial. Subtract any metal tools or written records. What's left? Almost nothing that screams advanced civilization. But the achievement was real. The knowledge was real. The sophistication was real. Just invisible to later observers who don't know what to look for. This reframe changes the question we should be asking. Instead of why don't we find evidence of ancient high technology, we should ask what evidence would super-adaptive coastal societies leave, and are we looking for it in the right places? The answer is, they'd leave subtle evidence. Worked stone in patterns that suggest planning. Slight modifications to coastlines that improved habitability. Stone arrangements that might be foundations or might be markers. Evidence of long-distance trade in obsidian and shells. Genetic signatures of large populations mixing and moving. And they'd leave knowledge. Encoded in descendant populations. Preserved in myths about floods and lost golden ages. Continued in practices that seem unnecessarily sophisticated for simple hunter-gatherers, like the astronomical knowledge of megalith builders or the navigation skills of Pacific Islanders. We're finding this evidence. We're just not always recognizing it as evidence of coastal adaptation because we're looking for evidence of civilization as we define it. But adaptation is its own kind of advancement, maybe the most important kind, because civilizations that rely on complex technology are fragile. They need constant inputs, resources, energy, maintenance. When those inputs fail, the civilization collapses. But adaptation is resilient. Knowledge encoded in human minds and cultural practices can survive catastrophe. It can be carried by refugees. It can be taught to new generations even, when all the infrastructure is gone. The coastal people's true advancement wasn't their buildings. It was their knowledge. Their understanding of how to live well in their environment, their social systems that allowed cooperation, their techniques for reading nature and planning for the future. And that advancement didn't entirely die when the floods came. It was carried inland by survivors. It mixed with other knowledge systems. It evolved and adapted to new environments. Some of it survives today, in the skills of traditional peoples who still navigate by stars, who still read weather from natural signs, who still maintain complex ecological knowledge without writing it down. The coastal civilization may be gone, but its legacy, the knowledge, the adaptation, the human ingenuity that didn't drown. It survived in a different form, scattered, transformed, but not entirely lost. And that, in the end, might be the most advanced thing of all. The ability to survive catastrophe, not through technology, but through adaptability, the ability to lose everything and still preserve what matters most. The knowledge of how to be human, how to work together, how to read the world, how to survive. That's advancement. That's the achievement. Not the buildings they constructed, but the understanding they cultivated. Not what they made, but what they knew. and what they passed down, through story and skill, to us. It's night again. Somewhere along a modern coastline, waves roll in with their eternal rhythm, the same rhythm they've followed for millions of years. But the land they reach now isn't the land they touched 12,000 years ago. Beneath these waves, 400 feet down, there might be a street, covered in sediment, silent, forgotten. There might be a carved stone that once marked a harbour. There might be the shadow of a canal, filled with silt, that once brought water to a thriving settlement. Or there might be nothing, just natural formations, just stone and sand. We don't know, and that's okay. The value of this journey isn't in proving anything. It's in wondering, in questioning, in remaining curious about the past. What we've explored tonight is a possibility, a what-if grounded in real evidence. Rising seas, climate catastrophe, flood myths, sites like Göbekli Tepe. Maybe there was a sophisticated coastal civilization. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe the floods erased evidence of human achievement. Maybe there was nothing there to erase. We may never know for certain. But the question reminds us that human beings have always been ingenious, always adaptive, always capable of more than we give them credit for. The people who lived 12,000 years ago weren't primitive. They were us. Same brains, same capacity for wonder and creation. And if catastrophe came, if the waters rose and their world drowned, they survived. They adapted. They carried forward what mattered most: their knowledge, their stories, their humanity. The waves continue. The ocean keeps its secrets. And somewhere beneath the surface, the past waits. Patient, silent. Perhaps we'll find it. Perhaps we won't. But the wondering is worthwhile. If this helped you drift off, leave a like. What mysteries should we explore next? Leave a comment. The past is vast. The questions are endless. Rest well. Dream deeply. And remember, the world has always been stranger and more wonderful than we imagine. Good night,